So we move on now to our media picks for the month. And do you want to go first this month, or shall I?
I'll go first if you like.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Let me just pull up the relevant. Please. I was torn really between two programs. One, because we've already covered it at length, I'm not going to talk about the BBC's documentary to go with Holocaust Memorial Day this year,
no.
The Last Survivors. But I will post the link to it on iPlayer for those people that are able to use iPlayer, and I suspect it'll be sold abroad. So keep an our viewer in places that don't have the BBC. Keep an eye open for it on your own local channels, satellite or cable or whatever. It's called The Last Survivors, and it's a documentary about some of the remaining survivors of the Holocaust and their personal experiences, and it is a very powerful watch.
Also,
and a necessary watch.
Also, incidentally, sometime I think earlier this month, They Shall Not Grow Old came out on DVD as well, so that's now out and released.
It is indeed. We spoke about it a few months ago, and it is stunning.
Yeah.
And again, I think necessary. But yes, the Last Survivors by the BBC. My actual media pick, though, is another BBC programme, and it's an authored documentary by the sculptor Sir Anthony Gormley, called How Art Began. And it's Gormley's personal journey through prehistoric art, in a sort of narrative timeline from the sort of 10,000-year-old cave paintings in southern France, northern Spain, through looking at some of the latest research, and eventually ending up in Indonesia and Australia, looking at rock painting and some of the very early work that's been identified in those locations now. Gormley, obviously, is most famous. I mean, you'll be very familiar with probably his most famous work, which is you pass on the A1 as you go head south. Yeah, The Angel of the North. Yeah,
I'm trying to show my arms there.
I thought you were either doing The Angel of the North or you were doing Kate Winslet in Titanic. But anyway,
King of the World. Sorry, go on. I'll never let go, Andy. I'll never let go.
Gormley basically takes on a journey through his response to the works and the latest research on those works. Actually, he talks to a number of archaeologists and experimental archaeologists in the course of the film. It is beautifully shot, as most documentaries are these days. It's shot on HD and it looks stunning. It has some beautiful images of the various works of art concerned. Gormley himself, from the very beginning of his career, has been interested in prehistoric art in general.
But also, lots of his work is basically about the human form.
Indeed.
But also,
in fact, his own form.
Well, his own form. Yeah. Well, actually, the Angel of the North is his own body. It was wrapped up in molded But some of his most striking, for example, the miniature work. So there are rooms that will just be filled with tiny little sculptures of humanoid figures, are very reminiscent of prehistoric art. For example, Absolutely. Venus figurines, this kind of thing. And so does he touch upon those connections with his own artwork then? Throughout
and actually, one of the things that is particularly prominent in the film is the use of hand stencils, which again he's used in his own work. But one of it talks about how difficult it is to actually produce a hand stencil, and it would now appear that far from being something that's done really quickly, it's something that could take as much as an hour to produce. So there's a real consciousness about and a real effort to produce this artifact on the wall of a cave. And obviously there's all sorts of inferences you can draw about staking a claim to the rock, grabbing hold of the location, or simply, I was here.
Yeah.
But we are here, my clan are here. Whatever. However, we can never know. Actually, we can do the ethnographic work and do comparisons.
Do you know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of. This is sci-fi though. It makes me think of Star Trek: First Contact, where, just bear with me. Where in that Picard and crew are sent hurtling back through time to a time just before the first warp-capable spaceship is launched.
I have seen the film too.
Yeah, and it's basically it's a converted nuclear missile that's in a bunker, and there's a moment where Picard is touching this thing that he's read about all his life, and he's describing to Data, who obviously is an ongoing critique and exploration of what it means to be a human being as an android. He's talking to Data about how touch makes something more real, and in this instance, there's something beautiful about the fact that not only is that person touching the rock, but we get to see that moment of interaction. It's one of the most relatable things that we can have from the
think of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel and God reaching out and touching, giving Adam life.
Well, there is that. But that's a very high concept. I mean, both literally and figuratively. But in this instance, just touching and leaving a mark, or touching and feeling the temperature of the stone, is such a relatable moment, and I think that's why a hand stencil is so powerful. Is that yes? The reason behind it may have been quite deep, but the effect is just so universal. We can all do it, and
it's the simplicity of all great art.
Yeah.
It's the essential simplicity that so much great art embodies. But there's another point, though. Gormley engages in some quite interesting speculation from an artist's point of view, with an artist's sensibility, looking at, for example, some of the animal paintings from 10 to 16,000 BCE in the caves in France and Spain. Where he compares one set of images where it's almost bucolic, it's almost like celebrating the nature that the artist or artists are seeing around them, and the incredible detail and beauty of the lines of and he talks again. It's an artist's analysis. He talks about a single line from the nose of a creature to its tail. Yeah. Again, incredibly simple, incredibly beautiful, but incredibly expressive. But then he also looks at some of the other work of the hunting scenes, for example, when he sees that you've got the animals dying with spears or arrows embedded in them, and so on. We were talking about hunting earlier, and he talks there about it's humans celebrating their power and essentially the power to dish out death. And of the images, he says that I think the artist is a Paleolithic Picasso, but then he says I don't care for Picasso because he was a predator, and then references Picasso's attitude to women. So again, there's an expression maybe of the darker side of human nature.
That is interesting. I suppose a couple of things come to mind though, because obviously he's an artist, not archaeologist.
Precisely.
But that does not discount his opinion. His opinion is absolutely worthwhile listening to, by the sounds of it. But it just makes me think, because we often gravitate, especially towards the caves in France, as being singular moments in art history. But we need to remember that these people were probably drawing on everything. They probably drew on rocks in the landscape, just to the wind and rain washed it away.
And as I said, the program ends in Australia, where of course rock art is an ongoing tradition. And outdoor rock art.
And I think we should be careful. I mean, this makes it harder to understand what the art means, because we should be careful not to think that actually that person was a uniquely gifted artist.
Oh yeah.
Rather that, I think what lots of this art tends to show us is that people are drawn to art. People do art, and it seems that actually, because there were lots of artists, especially in the cave art that we find in France and Spain, and it's clear that these people were, because you mentioned this idea of one single line. I think a few years ago now there was an analysis done of cave art that showed that these artists were immensely skilled, partly because they could do that one line that's so living, imbued with the musculature of the animal, But also this was partly possible because these people not only saw, but they ate, consumed, dissected. They took, in some respects, they were doing what Leonardo did to understand the human body every day with these animals. They understood where the skeleton and the muscles and the organs are. They understood how this stuff related, and so they could communicate that through the art. And so it's one of those. I mean, I will watch this, but it sounds like it's a fine line we must tread when we. Just because these drawings are, I mean, these might have been the bad drawings, if you know what I mean. There might have been much better ones that survived.
Absolutely, and they didn't survive. Absolutely, and that issue isn't really raised, although except by implication, and there are one or two missteps that maybe an archaeologist study wouldn't make. I mean, the one that's leapt out at me was at one point Gormley says, "I think we just have to give up on the idea of a hairy caveman being a brute." Now, no archaeologist has thought that for decades.
Yeah, at least decades. Yeah,
at least. Yeah. So,
frankly,
he's playing to a maybe a public perception, but certainly not one that archaeologists and art historians have had for any at all.
So I mean, for example, did they touch on or mention the fact that people weren't living in these caves? That people were visiting the caves to do art, but they weren't. We don't find people sleeping and eating there.
There were again. It was. The idea that sort of thing was mentioned in the sense that
I suppose my point being that there's no caveman in the first place.
Well, absolutely, and in fact, it did talk about the effort of if you're deep in that cave where there's no natural light at all, you had to keep your light going for at least an hour to produce your hand stencil.
Yeah.
And in fact, somebody will probably have to hold the light for you.
And crucially, no one until earlier in the 1900s. Saw this art with a solid block of light on it. It would have been flickering light, torch light. No one, because we often see these photographs of the Hall of Bowls, and wow, look at that! And it's laid out as this great big sort of stone canvas. But these things would have been appearing at you from the darkness as you walked through with the flickering torch. It's been described. I've had it described to me almost like the effect being like animation. It's all these factors come into play, but I think yes, I'll definitely give that a watch. Thank you for the record.
I think it's worth saying that for the final sequences as well, when he's in Australia talking to native Australians about their creativity, actually, and their reaction to the art, he talks to an older guy who was present when some paintings were done as a child.
Right. Yeah.
And about that timeline, but also the other thing, and there's a very striking sequence. And again, I'm thinking back of the Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel lying on his back doing those paintings, where, and again, I'm sure it's deliberate, but you have Gormley lying underneath a rock ledge, and as the script says, halfway between the ground and the sky. It's that, which may be where art sits.
Yeah.
So yeah. Issues, maybe lots of things to think about, beautifully shot, and Gormley is a very engaging person to say to lead you on the journey.
As Terry Pratchett once said, "Where the falling angel meets the rising ape."
Yes,
that is beautiful. I think
I like that, like so much of what Terry Pratchett said. That's brilliant.
Yeah, utterly brilliant. Okay, my media pick this month. Even though earlier in the month I watched and reviewed on DVD the film Alpha that came out last year in cinemas, and I've watched various things. Something that stood out to me now I want to talk about is the TV programme Stonehenge, Digging Up Britain's Past. This was episode 3 of 6 in this series, and it stands out to me because it was so close to being a brilliant program, so close, but it just fell slightly short, and it feels as though the ongoing search for a post-Time Team formula, continues, and certainly the legacy of Time Team is still felt in terms of the gap that it's left for us all, that people the hunger is there. People want to see this stuff, but how it's being presented,
and the archaeological profession completely screwed up by not going
not filling the gap.
Not filling the gap
adequately, yeah. So, in this instance, we have an archaeologist, what's his name, Alex Langlards, and TV presenter Helen Skelton. Helen Skelton from Blue Peter and some other places as well, exploring the monument of Stonehenge. And on the one hand, I want to praise the programme because it's the balance between Alex and Helen was reminiscent of, for example, Tony Robinson and Mick Astley, but also the archaeologist, all the archaeologists that he interacted with. It was one of those things where Helen is, in that instance, the person who's not an archaeologist, learning for the first time in some cases about the archaeology. And what was really nice to see actually was that she would have these moments where she would just realise, oh my, I'm holding something that someone made like 6,000 years ago. I think at one point there was an antler pick, for example, that was that an archaeologist was demonstrating the tools that were used to dig pits and trenches and the other features that we see in the landscape. And she was so enthused. It was lovely to see. And also Alex did a great job as a working archaeologist prior to being a TV presenter and also being a landscape archaeologist, of talking about his experiences and relating that, especially when it came to, for example, they visited at one point Grimes' graves to talk about material coming out of the ground to make stone tools on a near industrial level, and he was talking about how hard it is to dig with modern tools, never mind with an antler pick. But unfortunately, they also fell into a couple of traps. They really did, and I think it's a shame. And I wonder, as we talked about, you were talking about this idea of not letting the producer or the director take the narrative too far away from facts. In this instance, they sadly fell into the trap of first of all, not talking about, I think adequately talking about Stonehenge as a monument that gained its meaning from the landscape that it's in, and all the monuments that surround it. And I've talked about this in various ways previously on this on our Archaeosoup YouTube channel. I'm hesitant to do a video about Stonehenge on its own, because it doesn't exist on its own, and also its meaning is constantly being added to by subsequent research. At some point I may well do something that looks at top 10 interpretations of Stonehenge, because that's not a definitive statement. But I don't think they adequately communicated that Stonehenge is probably related and drew its meaning for the people who built it from other places. They also made a slightly lazy reference to a story that we covered in the Watching Brief earlier this year about burials around the monument having come from what is now Wales, and the idea that the monument and Welsh people are intimately connected definitively. That was strongly implied in this show, and I think that's a shame as well. There's a connection, but what that means, we're not sure, and they could have done better communicating that. But the biggest shame for me, shame as in the thing I thought was the biggest, oh, that's such a shame. It wasn't shameful, if you see what I mean, but it was such a shame. The biggest one was there was a weird statement at one point where they said nothing like this, when Stonehenge was built, nothing like this existed in the world. And what are they talking about? The pyramids were being built at this point. Globally, Stonehenge, I hate to say it, was not that impressive on a global scale. But this was definitely playing to a British audience, wanting to feel as though Stonehenge, as a singular monument, was such an immense achievement. But yet again, it did that thing of further separating the monument from its landscape, turning it into this little pinnacle of a global achievement, and that's where it fell short. It could have been really good, this program, but it had these little things that just further alienated the monument from its reality, and also from current interpretations of that monument, especially in the context of knowing that a few thousand miles away we've got ancient Egyptians building ungodly structures. It's
and a few hundred miles away we've got Karnak and Le Grand Meunier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was so close, but not quite there. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about. I mean, did you get to see this at all, or anything in the series?
I think first thing to say actually is this went out on Channel 5 in the UK.
Yeah.
And 5 is starting to try to plough a new furrow in commissioning relatively high-end, relatively limited audience documentaries like this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This wasn't pop history that you'd find on the History Channel, because a lot of the stuff they used to take was retreads from the History Channel and Nat Geo and so on, often from American production companies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is a much more, as you say, the analogue with Time Team is very interesting. It's much more sober. It's much more BBC in many respects, actually, or old Channel 4.
Yeah.
Which is really ironic, because 5 began as its first program controller set a sex and shopping channel. It's remaking itself, and so to see, and there have been other commissions like this. So good to see that kind of commission. It stylistically, as you say, it's quite derivative. It's the representative of the audience, and who is the interlocutor between the information and the archaeologist purveying the information. Alex Lannon's in this case. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Who, as you say, again, has done a lot of TV work. Was involved in the last few seasons of Time Team, amongst other things, if I remember rightly. So we're dealing with people who know what they're doing in all respects, both broadcasting and in terms of the archaeology. I think in it's what TV archaeology will always be criticised for by professional archaeologists. Some professional archaeologists, many professional archaeologists, is oversimplifications simplifications which sometimes veer into oversimplifications.
Well, and also a definitive statement. A definitive sort of hyperbolic statement.
And I agree with you about the English exceptionalism. It's something we're all living with at the moment, unfortunately, and it's something that I think needs to be combated. Because apart from anything else, these national boundaries and so on didn't exist at that period, as far as we're aware. So, and regionality is important, and
actually, sorry, something else that occurs to me as well is that we're increasingly understanding that, for example, Orkney may have been far more impressive, and likely was more impressive than Stonehenge. People at Stonehenge were probably, if you said this is the best thing ever, they'd be like, go to Orkney. It's such a lazy statement to say that nothing like this had existed in basically human history before. It's disingenuous, and it's a shame that I'm sure that Alex, if he was involved in writing or any form of this process, would have said, "Are we sure we want to say that?" But at some point, he was clearly overruled.
I don't know about this program in particular, but just to give people watching an idea of how the process happens. Mm-hmm. I've been involved in scripting TV documentaries, and for example, on one occasion, I was handed a draft shooting script by the producer, which the producer had written, which I and a colleague then spent nearly a month rewriting, taking out the errors, the colossal misinterpretations, the unsupported statements, and so on. But actually, to be fair, the person concerned worked with us very closely, and I think all our recommendations were actually accepted, and all the stuff that we were most concerned about was taken out. Now, I think two things there. First of all, you had the producer who was actually prepared to share the shooting script in the first place. You weren't just expected to turn up on the first day of the shoot and say your piece to camera to fit with what was wanted. And secondly, there were people there who were working on it who didn't just hopefully know what we were doing, because that's why we were hired, but were prepared to stand up for what we knew.
Yeah.
And say that actually, no, you cannot include this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we don't. Again, we don't want to speculate too much on exactly how that happened in this TV show. It's not fair to. But it is worthwhile, as is our ongoing, dare I say, a mission in life for me, more or less, to analyse, talk about, and push for better moments like that. The moment of creating a narrative, and it would have been a narrative. I'm sure over the course of the series they're thinking about it as a story, and what each episode has to say.
Yeah.
When they're constructing that, it's a shame that the little mistakes weren't picked up on, or the impact even of little mistakes, even if they're playing to a British audience, or as you say, to an English audience. It should no longer wash that these things, that this sort of exceptionalism or this sort of laziness makes it all the way onto our TV screen. And so I would say, yeah, watch it. It's a great show. It's really interesting.
It's very well made. Two really good presenters.
Yeah, and for example, I've never seen Grimes Graves filmed so well. It was a beautiful thing, but it just fell short. It fell short of greatness. It's such a shame. Such a shame. Yeah. Unlike, of course, your episode of Time Team. That's great. That was true greatness manifest.
The proudest moment of my career, and you can find it. The day I was awarded TV Expert of the Week by by Harry Hill. Harry Hill's TV Burp. Me and Francis Pryor.
Wow. Okay.
It was me that was. It's a classic. It's only look it up on YouTube. And in fact, my children. We were talking about Playmobil earlier. My children actually made this for me.
Let's lift it up in there. Oh yeah. Oh wow. Wow. What does it say on the front?
It says TV Burp Expert.
Brilliant. Although they seem to think you're bald, unfortunately.
Yes. I haven't even got a fedora.
Oh dear. But that's what a lovely thing to have. So wonderful.
It's the combination of a camera and a rather large mug of, well, presumably it's meant to be the coffee or beer. I'm not sure which. But anyway.
Wonderful. Some people get Oscars, but who cares about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, actually, are you okay with us putting a link to that if we can find it down below?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, look, it's there. It's in the public domain, and last time I looked, I hadn't been hurt by it.
Wonderful.
I actually think it's hilarious.
Wonderful. Well, we made it to the end of another watching brief. Those of you at home might have spotted possibly that we filmed this in two different sections. There have been a couple of Where's Wally type changes certainly in my shot in the background here, halfway through February's watching brief.
Just for fun, anybody comment below the line if you can play Spot the Difference.
Yeah, spot the difference.
Where's Indy?
Yeah, well, not so much indie, but the indie is related to what's gone missing, definitely.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. It's been an interesting month, and I suppose we can only look forward to what comes later on in the year. As ever, we welcome conversation.
I'm not sure we can actually.
No. Remember the swear jar. We're not allowed to say it. We can't say it. Not this month at least. Let's just have 1 month off. Yeah, let's see what happens next. As I say, we welcome conversation and comment below. If there's any news stories that you want us to look at or to think about featuring in the watching brief, definitely send them in by email. The email link is, of course, available below. And as ever, all that remains is for me to say thank you for your time this month, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Mark. Have a good week. Have a good month. See you next time.
Will do. And as ever, until next time, do take care at home. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.